Hey Sue, how are you?
Fine, thank you, Chris. How are you?
It's been a long day, but I'm good, thanks.
Speak to me about long.
Well, my day started at 4 o'clock, and then I went to work, and I'm working at an emergency water treatment plant in Asheville, and today was just struggle after struggle after struggle, but we got everything working. Life is good. I'm just tired.
Okay. So are you getting the job done?
We are. We had a good day today. We the equipment broke down on us. Um, but we got it back up and running. We're doing some modifications to the system to get it to work better. That's halfway done. We're in the commissioning phase of that right now, and yeah, a lot going on. A lot of balls in the air.
How long do you think this is going to take?
Well, we just it was a 6 month contract. We just signed the first 6 month extension, so through November for now, and there's another 6 month extension after that.
So you're
We'll see
going to
what
be up
happens.
there all this time, or you're going back and forth?
I'm going back and forth. I'm staying in a hotel when I'm working up here, and then when I'm off, I go home.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I was home Saturday and Sunday of this week, and I'll go back. I'll go back home. I think Thursday or Friday of next week.
Oh,
And
okay.
I think Rachel's coming up to see me on Thursday.
Oh, well, that's good. Um,
Yeah.
I have a question. Is all the tumult in the government impacting you at all?
No, no, this was all done before, and we're emergency cert. Like the contract that we work under is through FEMA and the Army Corps of Engineers. So that's yeah, they're not touching that. They're not messing with that. So
Not yet, anyway.
I doubt it. Like the contract was written before all the craziness has started.
Okay.
So yeah,
How is the
but no,
crazy with the government playing out in North Carolina?
as far as I know, I'm not noticing it. But then I've been too busy to notice.
Okay.
Yeah, I haven't noticed anything. There's a lot of people who are upset about it. It seems like, but I haven't seen anything, or I haven't noticed anything, or not aware of anything. But that
Okay.
doesn't mean
Well,
it's not happening. It just means I'm not paying attention.
okay. Well, and you're obviously very busy.
I'm trying to be. I'm trying not to pay attention to the news right now. It doesn't seem like there's anything good happening, so I just avoid it. Keeps me happier.
Right. I agree with that. I didn't
Yeah.
realize it was quite so early.
In the
When
day?
I signed on, it's like 5:19. Is that
Yeah,
right?
that is correct. I
Okay.
think. Yeah, I mean, we people usually sign on a bit early. I know that. Well, you're usually on, and Rachel will be on any minute now, I'm sure. And then John is usually on by now.
Right.
He's always, but Fred
Proud.
shows up at. Yep, Fred shows up at 5:30 regardless.
Well, he hasn't said he's not, so I assume he's going to.
Same. Yep, exactly. So it
Here's
was a
John as
beautiful.
we speak.
Aha! Speak of the devil.
Hello, John. We just said John is usually on at 10 minutes before, and there you are.
Well, how are you, Sue?
I'm fine, thank you. And Chris is just telling me how he is and how the government is playing out in North Carolina.
Oh, really? Well, I'm sure he's got his arms full.
Oh yeah, today was a busy day, but it was productive and progress was made, so that was good.
That is good. Well, from all of the pictures I've seen in those little areas where I'm sure they're isolated and what have you, your skills are a welcome sight.
I hope so. But yeah, I don't have anything to do with that recovery, on in the field. But I've been seeing the pictures and talking to some of the people who are affected, and it's still not good.
Yeah.
It's gonna be years and years and years before any sense of normality,
Oh,
whatever.
really?
Oh, for a lot of these places, yeah. I mean, like Chimney Rock, they basically have to rebuild the whole little town. Um,
And
they're
that was
just
such
now.
a nice little town too.
It really was. Heck, just here I'm in Swannanoa, which was kind of the epicenter of all the damage, at least on close to Asheville. And
Yeah.
they've just started removing debris and getting some of the bridges back open.
Wow.
But yeah, when I drive back and forth to the reservoir every day, as long as the sun's up, I mean, it's yeah, it's sad. The amount of damage, and the river did not care. It just came on through.
Well, Chris, Swannanoa is a great Cherokee name.
Yes. What does it mean? Do you know?
Actually, there's an area up by where we go every summer, and it's called Swannanoa. And I'm not sure exactly what it means, but being that you've spent all the time up there, when we get up there, I'm going to ask that question. What exactly does it mean? It's a word for the 50 years I've been going to that area. That
Where
is
is that, John?
what's that?
Where is that?
It's in eastern Oklahoma. It's the capital of the Cherokee Nation where we go. It's called
Okay.
Tahlequah. And
Alaqua. Yep.
just adjacent to that on the Illinois River is a place called Swannanoa. And, there's a long history of the Eastern Band and the Western Band, and it's so interesting to read about all of the different issues that the tribes have had over the years.
Right.
It
And there are
is so
many.
rich in history where you are.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny because we live in Cullowhee, and we still can't get a straight answer for what Cullowhee actually means. The 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 rumor was it means like lily of the valley or something like that. But then other
Uh,
people are like, no, no, it doesn't mean that at all. It means like hunting place of Kala or something like that, which is
yeah.
a six-handed like demigod god type creature that lives around here. Anyway,
Chris,
yes,
when
sir.
what you can do, what I will do is I'll go to the Cherokee Heritage Center. They have a big research center, and
Yeah.
they
If it's still open,
oh no, it's still open. It's the Cherokee Nation is an extremely wealthy community, or I should say nation. And what I will do is if you'd write down the spelling of your town and just send it to me, and
I'll
and
do it.
and I will get you exactly what it means.
Oh, awesome. That would be great.
Yeah. Where's Rachel?
She should be here.
Oh,
She
good.
said she was coming. She's on her way. I'm still in Swannanoa, and Rachel's in Cullowhee.
Oh,
I
I
talked to
see.
her. Yeah, I talked to her a minute ago. She was coming.
Yeah. Yeah, the history of the Cherokees is phenomenal. They were very well educated. They had a number of people before the Trail of Tears that were educated, like at Harvard, Sue, and very well educated. They had their own written language, which is unique in most of these American indigenous tribes.
yeah, when I lived in South Carolina, I lived on the road that is called the Trail of Tears.
Oh,
So
did you? Okay.
I'm familiar with a lot of the Cherokee history, and there are still quite a few Cherokees who live more where Chris is than where I was, more up around Asheville.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, like where we live, there's still a lot of Cherokees that live up in the hills and don't speak English. That
Really?
yeah, when my wife was teaching, she's a speech therapist, and every year there would be new kids in school that had no English skills. All they spoke was Cherokee. And of course, they needed a translator and to help them and all that. Of course, the tribe provides that. And then she helped them with diction and all of those kinds of things. But yeah, there's a lot of people that just do not. English is their second language. Cherokee is their primary language.
That's interesting because that's
So
kind of the opposite here. Cherokee was pretty much dead for a long time, and now it's just finally being taught again. And you know,
Really, as a matter
Mhm.
of fact, the university or the Cherokee Nation has set up a separate school that's all in Cherokee.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. And I'm sure there are people from the Eastern Band as well as the Western Band that are going there. Build a huge facility.
Huh.
is there money from gambling?
Oh yeah,
There is
that's
here.
what feeds everything.
It's a
The
blessing and a
Cherokee,
curse for the
yeah,
Eastern Band, that's for sure.
yeah, the Cherokees have a very huge budget every single year, and of course the gambling, takes a lot of it. Unfortunately, my idea of the gambling is the poor spreading the money to the poor, and the Cherokees take off about 10%. But you go
I
into
mean,
those, I
you'd
don't
be
know what your
surprised the amount of money
casinos.
that
What's that?
oh the amount of money that comes through this area
Oh,
because of the casino is ridiculous.
it is amazing. And you see these people every single day go there, and
Mhm.
it's sad because they can't afford to lose the money, and they're all going to hit the big one, or they'll talk about it, and they sit there with their cigarette ashes. And of course, in North Carolina, I guess that's the norm, hanging off
No,
cigarettes,
you cannot
playing
smoke
with.
in the casino. You cannot
Oh,
smoke in the
really?
casino. No, not allowed.
No kidding. In North
No,
Carolina?
no
Wow.
kidding. Hi, Fred.
Hi,
Hi,
Fred.
Chris. Hey, John.
Well,
I,
we're having a big Cherokee discussion.
I realized that. I didn't know you couldn't smoke in a casino. That goes along with gambling. You have to
That's
have a drink
right.
while you're gambling, and
Right?
you have to have a smoke while you're drinking. It just goes together.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And especially when you're getting ready to hit the big one. I get a kick out of these people sitting there, and I'm not going to
Yeah.
say older people because I think I'm probably older than most of them.
Ah,
But sitting there with that cigarette hanging out of their mouth with a half inch, three quarters of an inch of ash hanging on it, the smoke coming up, and they're just hitting that button as much as they can.
Yeah.
as hard as they can. Yep.
Anyway, you're doing a
Okay.
lot of good for those folks up there based on the pictures I saw, Chris. Thank you so much. You're a blessed
Well,
guy.
well, thank you, John. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I mean that's it. I used to love. I think I told you I loved driving through those areas because I could. It was faster for me to drive through many of the southeastern states, like or the areas that I would go to, rather than fly. And what an education driving through those little towns and all of that. Because as a California boy, that was a real exposure.
Yeah, I believe it.
Yeah. But you're lucky to live where you do. That's a great place.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Yeah.
Well,
How are you, Rachel?
okay.
Good. Good, good,
That's
good.
good.
She's on the
Thank
porch,
you.
it looks like.
Yes, I am.
Yes.
She's been sitting out there enjoying it. We ask about you every week, but it looks like she's in a pretty nice spot
Ah,
too.
yeah. Okay. Well, I think all the regulars are here, so um, we can go ahead and start. Um, we've gotten up to chapter 35 in Exodus,
Right.
and unfortunately, to me anyway, this the rest of the book of Exodus is just it's more details about the building of the sanctuary, um, which is it's really incredible how much space is devoted to that. I mean, we take up 4 Saturdays, four separate parshas, 4 separate readings are all just dedicated to all these nitty-gritty details about putting that sanctuary together in the desert. So, and to me, frankly, a lot of it's pretty boring. I mean, we're reading curtain measurements and the length of boards and this kind of stuff. But there are a couple of interesting things though in these chapters. So again, we're starting with chapter 35, and if somebody wants to read the just the first three chapters, first three verses rather, 1 through 3.
Sure, I'll go ahead.
Yeah.
Oh,
Uh,
Moses then
Moses,
convocated the whole Israelite community and said to them, "These are the things that the Lord has commanded us to do. On 6 days work may be done, but on the seventh day you shall have a Sabbath of complete rest, holy to the Lord. Whoever does any work on that shall be put to death. You shall kindle no fire throughout your settlements on the Sabbath day."
Yeah. So again, this is probably the fourth or fifth time, that the Sabbath law is given. And that really is kind of typical of the way the Torah works. It repeats each law several times, and each time with a little bit different wording, and they often add a little detail in one that wasn't in the other. Here again, the death penalty for breaking the Sabbath, that's the second time we've had that. But now they put in something new, that you're not allowed to kindle a fire on the Sabbath, which is kind of odd because again, this really doesn't come into the definition of work. I mean, it certainly isn't work for us because we have matches and cigarette lighters and whatnot. But but even back then, I mean, rubbing two sticks together to start a fire is not what you really call hard work. And the usual commentary on this is that basically fire again represents human creativity. I mean, it's something that man essentially learned to use. And it's almost one of the elements at the beginning of human civilization. And when we first were learned to use fire, in Greek mythology, Prometheus is punished for stealing fire from the gods and bringing it to man, because that's really, to the Greeks, was the beginning of human civilization. And so it was really kind of the symbol is what fire symbolizes, human creativity, and that's supposed to stop on the Sabbath. So it's really the symbolic value of the fire. But then that created another problem for the rabbis, because what do you do in winter? I mean, you're going to be shivering in the dark, on most winter days, and the Sabbath is supposed to be a joyful day, and it's kind of hard to be joyful. So what the rabbis did was kind of nudge the text a little bit. Yeah, the literal Hebrew says, "You shall not have a fire burning, you shall not burn a fire." They decided it meant kindle a fire, not necessarily, have the fire burning. So you could kindle the fire, before the Sabbath began, and you could leave it burning, during the Sabbath day. There was actually, the Sadducees during the Greco-Roman period, who were literally biblical literalists. They didn't believe in rabbinic interpretation. The Sadducees literally would shiver in the dark. The Pharisees went along with the rabbinic interpretation, and so they kept the fire burning during the Sabbath.
But Fred,
Yeah.
back in that kind of time period, didn't most people keep a fire going continuously? I mean, they weren't every day sitting there rubbing sticks together trying to start
Yeah.
the fire, but they
Yeah,
kept the fire
some people
going.
do believe that. Yeah, that there would be a community fire that would be
Yeah,
kept going so that everyone could light their fires from that, not have to
right.
go through the sticks and flint stuff over and over again to get it lit. Yeah, that's very possible. Yeah. But again, it's like most of the things that are prohibited on Sabbath, they really aren't work that in the usual sense. They just symbolize human creativity.
Hmm.
Using your telephone or watching a TV show, being on the internet, getting an email. I mean, none of these things are really work in any real sense that we would consider work, but they're all symbolic of human creativity. And that's what has to stop, on the Sabbath. So it's really most of the things that are prohibited on the Sabbath are not physical work. They're really symbolic work in a sense. I mean, you could actually be lying on the couch Saturday afternoon, but going through in your mind what you're going to do when you get back to the office on Monday, and that would be considered work as far as the Sabbath is concerned. It's human creativity, being
Sure.
done on the Sabbath. There's also one rabbinic interpretation of why is this verse here in the middle of all this stuff about building the sanctuary. And some of the rabbis said it was just to keep reminding people, building the sanctuary is a big deal, but the Sabbath comes first. You got to stop all the work on the sanctuary, when Sabbath comes. And then after that, they get into again, go back to the building of the sanctuary. And a lot of that's really kind of repetitive. It really is just repeating stuff that we've had in previous sections. Verses 4 through 9 is really just kind of an inventory. They're just kind of listing all the stuff that has to be on hand for the construction. So if somebody wants to read verses 4 through 9.
Okay, I'll do it. Moses said to all the congregation of the people of Israel, "This is the thing that the Lord has commanded. Take from among you a contribution to the Lord. Whoever is of generous heart, let him bring the Lord's contribution, gold, silver, and bronze, blue and purple and scarlet yarns, and fine twined linen, goat's hair, tanned ram's skins, and goat skins, acacia wood, oil for the light, spices for the anointing oil, and for the fragrant incense, and onyx stones and stones for setting for the ephod and for the breastplate."
Yes, uh, so basically, all this stuff, stuff that it obviously is lying around the Sinai desert. There's plenty of this stuff. The question always comes up, where do they get this? I mean, this is a huge inventory of really a lot of it very expensive stuff: gold, silver, gems, spices, you know, high grade linen. And of course, the rabbinic answer, the only answer you can get from the text, is that before they left Israel, God gave them favor in the eyes of the Egyptians, and the Egyptians gave them all this severance pay or reparations for slavery. But actually, if you turn back to that, that's actually in chapter 12 of Exodus. And it's not really what it says. If you look at chapter 12 of Exodus, I'm just turning back to it. Um, it's chapter 12, verses 35 and 36. And what it actually says is, "And the children of Israel did according to the word of Moses, and they asked of the Egyptians jewels of silver, jewels of gold, and raiment. And the Lord gave the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, so they let them have what they asked, and they despoiled the Egyptians." Well, okay, yeah, I can buy the gold and silver and some clothes. I mean, that would make sense as far as severance pay, but not all this other stuff. And so, really, when you think about the building of a tabernacle, whenever you read anything in the early books of the Bible, you really kind of have to decide in your own mind, am I going to read this literally, or am I going to read this metaphorically? And yes, sometimes it's difficult. Um, a lot of people, I think, do read it literally. They really do believe that this was actually built according to these specifications in the desert. And this is actual factual history. Uh, the more times I read over this thing, the more I'm really inclined to think that this may have been written by somebody much later who kind of imagined them doing this, building this great thing in the desert. I really have a really hard time really looking at this as factual history. Some it's just difficult. There's just too much stuff going on here.
One of the things that I was wondering as we read through this and you talk about all of the boring references to how to build the temple and all that.
Mhm.
Building these huge physical edifices in the different societies seem to be a real symbol of the strength and the wealth of that society. And I'm wondering, as we read through this, it is so specific, but at that point in time, the Jewish population was the only monotheistic population, and that they inherited this idea of got to have a structure that stands out. Does that make any sense, Fred?
It could be that. Well, there's one rabbinic commentary. Some of the rabbis believe that this is really tied to the golden calf. After this horrendous sin that they've sinned against God, that building the sanctuary is kind of an act of atonement. They're saying, "Oh my God, we've really gotten God angry. Maybe He's just going to abandon us or send us back to Egypt or whatever. We've got to do something really impressive to show Him that He's really our God." And that led to the building of the
Okay.
sanctuary. Yeah. Although there's another opinion, some modern scholars believe that this may have been written back in Solomon's time, at the time that Solomon was building his temple. And so they
Mhm.
imagined that this temple was really just a copy of this, sanctuary that had been built before in the desert. You know,
Sure.
this was kind of a model, that God needs to have some permanent structure that represents Him here on earth. So you can look at it from a number of different ways. I just, one thing that makes it look factual is the fact they have all these nitty-gritty details.
Yeah.
This thing was 5.5 cubits long, and it was 3 cubits wide. And there, it really goes into a lot of real. That's one of the reasons it's so boring, and a lot of it is just specifications,
Yeah.
and which makes you really think that if this was totally mythic, would they really bother going into all that kind of detail?
Yeah.
So you could make that an argument for it really being factual and not metaphorical.
Sure. It was written for an engineer like Harold.
Yeah, yeah. Unfortunately, not here with us.
Yeah.
And then well, maybe the text then goes on, and verses 20 through 29 gives the response of the people. Have the congregation responded to Moses' call. Somebody wants to read 20 through 29.
Sure. And all the community of Israelites went out from before Moses, and every man whose heart moved him, and everyone whose spirit urged him came. They brought a donation of the Lord for the task of the tent of meeting, and for all its work, and for the sacred garments. And the men came, besides the women, all whose heart urged them. They brought brooches and earrings and rings and pendants, every ornament of gold, and every man who raised an elevation offering of gold to the Lord. Every man with whom was found indigo and purple and crimson and linen and goat hair, and red and ram skins and ochre dyed skins brought it. Whoever donated a donation of silver and bronze brought a donation of the Lord, and with whomever was found acacia wood for all the tasks of the work, they brought it. And every woman wise-hearted with her hands spun and brought the thread work of indigo and purple and crimson and linen. And all the women whose hearts moved them with wisdom spun the goat hair. And the chieftains brought carnelian stones and stones for setting in the ephod and in the breastplate, and the spice and the oil for the lamp, and for the anointing oil, and for the aromatic incense. Every man and woman whose heart urged them to bring for all the tasks that the Lord had charged to do by the hand of Moses, the Israelites brought a free will gift to the Lord.
Yeah. I think the significance that a lot of rabbis put on this is that they actually mention women, which the Bible doesn't do a whole lot. The women actually did some of the work on the tabernacle. And that's one of the few places in the Bible where women are recognized as doing something, as being part of the congregation and contributing. It really almost the only place. So I think this passage is significant, for no other reason other than that. Right? And then he goes over, with verse 30, he talks about Bezalel again. We talked about him before, as the chief artist and architect for the whole thing. Um, the next part I think is significant is when you go over to chapter to 37, where he talks about building the ark. Let's see, let me see if I can find it here. 7. Yeah, 37, the first 9 verses of 37 talk about how they built the ark in there. Um, Anybody wants to read those first 9 verses of 37?
I can keep
Sure.
going.
Okay.
And Bezalel made the ark of acacia wood 2.5 cubits its length, and 1.5 cubits its width, and 1.5 cubits its height. And he overlaid it with pure gold inside and outside, and he made for it a golden molding all around. And he cast for it 4 golden rings on its 4 feet, and 2 rings on its one side, and 2 rings on its other side. And he made poles of acacia wood and overlaid them with gold. And he brought the poles through the rings on the side of the ark to carry the ark. And he made a cover of pure gold, 2.5 cubits its length, and 1.5 cubits its width. And he made 2 cherubim of gold, hammered work he made them, at the 2 edges of the cover, 1 cherub at one edge, and 1 cherub at the other edge. From the cover he made the cherubim at both its edges. And the cherubim spread their wings above, shielding the cover with their wings, and their faces toward each other. Toward the cover their faces were.
Yeah. Anybody see anything strange about that?
Aren't the cherubim graven images?
Exactly. Yeah. Somebody's breaking the second commandment here, which, which breaks up the question: can God break His own commandment? I
Yeah.
guess He can. I mean, He come to carve these cherubim, and it's not the only time He does it. When we get to the Book of Numbers, there's an episode later on where the Israelites are sinning again. I forget exactly what they're doing, but anyway, they're sinning, and God has fiery serpents come and bite them. And then He tells Moses, make a bronze serpent, put it up on a pole, and everyone who looks upon the serpent, will be healed. Again, violating the second commandment. So,
Mhm.
but here, and then again, there's a lot of argument about what the cherubim actually look like. Because, we think of a cherub, we think of a cute little baby angel. But that really comes from Renaissance Italian painters who did it that way. The first mention of cherubim in the Bible is way back in the Garden of Eden. When God kicks Adam and Eve out of the garden, he puts cherubim with fiery swords at the gates so that nobody ever comes back in again. So the cherubim were pretty fierce creatures. We don't have any description of them. There's one translation of the Torah that said they were winged sphinxes. They were sphinx-looking things with wings. I mean, we know they're winged because it talks about their wings spread out and touching each other. So you have these 2 winged creatures which are sitting on top of the box that they put the tablets of the 10 Commandments in. Then the next, yeah.
And I was just going to say, they were almost like the palace guards, and rather than God's messengers.
Sort of, yeah. I mean, and they're sort of being used as guardians here. They're kind of guarding the ark in a sense. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. I think that's the only 2 times in the Bible the cherubim are mentioned. Once with the Eden story, and then once again here. And the only other types of angels the Bible talks about are the seraphim. They don't get mentioned until I think the book of Isaiah. And the
Mhm.
seraphim aren't described again, except the Hebrew word seraph means to burn. And so one theory is they were flames shaped like angels. The other is that they were actually fiery angels, angels that burned like the burning bush, but were not consumed by the fire. Then the next item that he makes after he makes the ark is the table. And the table apparently is where they set out the showbread. He gets instructions of that later. And these apparently were twisted, braided pieces of bread that were baked and just displayed on the table. They were displayed there for several days. The priests ate them, and then there was a new, set of loaves of bread put on there. And there's no description of the showbread, but the tradition is that that's where challah comes from. The braided egg bread. It's
Oh,
often served on Sabbath. And the table was where you put, if it really was challah, the table is where you put these loaves of challah on. Then after he talks about the table, he goes and talks about the menorah, the candlestick. Um, And that starts with verse 17 on 37. Yeah, I'll go ahead and read that one. He made the candlestick of pure gold. Beaten work he made the candlestick. Even its base and its shaft and its cups and its flowers were of one piece with it. What you think about it, that is a huge job. And taking one whole block of gold I mean, gold is malleable, but still, I mean, you really have to wonder making a menorah out of a block of solid gold. Um, and there were six branches going out of the sides thereof, three branches of the candlestick out of the one side thereof, and three branches of the candlestick on the other side thereof, and three cups made like almond blossoms in one branch, a cup and a flower, and three cups made like olive branches in the other branch, a cup and a flower. So for the six branches. And the candlesticks were four cups made like almond blossoms, and they go on and on with this. Um, the interesting thing is, he made, if you look at verse 23, there's an extra cup in the middle though, because verse 23 says he made the lamps thereof seven, and the tongs thereof and the snuff dishes thereof of pure gold. Um, so this is not really the menorah, this is the symbol of Israel today. If you've ever seen the official seal of the state of Israel, it's a six-branch menorah. It's not exactly the way the menorah is described here. Well, actually, one of the interesting ways that we have of knowing that these objects actually did exist, even if not in the sanctuary, if that's not a literal fact, they did exist in the temple that was built later. And one of the reasons we know that is in the year 70, when the first Jewish revolt against Rome was crushed, Titus, who was commanding the Roman army at that time, looted the temple and brought a lot of the stuff of the temple back to Rome. And if you've ever visited Rome or seen pictures of it, there's the Arch of Titus. That's that triumphal arch that Titus built to celebrate, his victory over Judea. And he actually carved on it a lot of the stuff that he took from the temple. So we have the menorah, we have the table, we have trumpets. A lot of the stuff that's described here is actually carved into the Arch of Titus. So it's one way of knowing the stuff really did exist. Although again, it might not have existed until the actual temple was built, not necessarily in the sanctuary here. And then he goes on. If you go to verse 10, let's see when the 37, no 37 25, verse 25. Here he builds an altar, but only for the incense. It's kind of a small altar. Let's see. Let's see where he describes it here. Yeah, it's verse 25 of chapter 37. Let's see if I have it here. Seven.
Incense altar, is that where you're talking about?
Yeah, 25. He made the altar of incense of acacia wood. A cubit was the length thereof, a cubit the breadth thereof, four square, 2 cubits were the height, and the horns were of one piece. So it's a tiny altar. Cubit's about 18 inches. So
Well,
this
is
is
that what a
really a
cubit
relative.
is?
Yeah, the way there are two measurements that the Bible uses for that. One is the cubit and the other is the span. And the cubit is the length from the elbow to the tip of the middle finger, apparently the average adult. So it's roughly a foot and a half. So this was really the span, if you stretch out your hand as far as you can, from the tip of your thumb to the tip of your little finger would be a span.
Ah, okay.
Much smaller. Yeah. So this was just an 18-inch square top, just for burning incense. And then he doesn't get to the regular altar for the burnt offering until he gets to chapter 38. And there it says he made the altar of burnt offering of acacia wood, 5 cubits was the length, 5 cubits the breadth. So now you're talking about 7.5 feet. So that would be big enough, to put an animal, a fair-sized animal onto the altar. and 3 cubits the height. So it's about 4.5 feet high, about maybe chest high for the priest, who are laying the stuff up there on the altar. And then then they give this list of all the implements you had to use, in order to do the sacrifices. Verse 3, he made all the vessels of the altar, the pots, the shovels, the basins, the flesh hooks, the fire pans, all the vessels that he made of brass. This was all the stuff you'd need to keep the fire going, probably to scrape stuff off the altar, to clean it off. Hooks for taking pieces of meat and putting it on there. Um, and apparently, this was all the Levites who actually had to do all the grunt work. It was the Levites who had to keep the fire going, and clean up the whole mess after the whole thing was over. And also the Levites, really, who had to take the whole thing down and put it together again, whenever they moved. Because this whole thing is not a permanent structure. It's made to be taken down and put together again. When they describe the table and the ark for the covenant, and these things all have rings in them that you put poles through, and you lift them up by the poles and carry them to wherever the next place that you're going to. When they talk about the boards, and they do this a little bit later on, all the boards are fitted into sockets. There are no nails or screws. They're all fitted into sockets. And so the whole thing can be, like a giant Lego kind of thing. The whole thing can be disassembled and then carried on to the next place. But again, it's the Levites who got to do all this work. They've got to take everything apart, load up all the boards, fold up all these linen curtains, get everything all set, and then haul it to the next place, and then put it all together again. So, obviously it was not that much fun being a Levite. I think it was easier, and you read in the book of Numbers, one of the big stories in the book of Numbers is the rebellion of Korah against Moses. Korah is Moses' cousin, his first cousin, actually. So he's one of the Levites, and he's really mad because, only one family in the tribe of Levi, Moses and Aaron's family, gets to have the high priesthood. Only their descendants can be priests. Everybody else in the tribe is a Levite, which means they basically do all the work when you really come down to it. And this may have been the reason for the rebellion of Korah. When they got to the temple, it was a lot easier. The temple was a permanent structure. They didn't have to do all this carrying of stuff back and forth. And then they got to do some stuff that was more fun. Apparently, the Levites got to sing psalms in the temple. So, it was a lot better for them once the temple was actually there, and they didn't have all that, because the sanctuary was a lot of work. And in a sense, they were kind of like circus roustabouts. You have to take the big tent down when the circus is over, pack it up and go to the next place and put it up again.
So what this is saying is that they were semi-nomadic, and they probably followed where they needed to have their animals feed and what have you. So every so often they'd have to pick up and find a new area to be in, and that's
Well, even after they crossed the Jordan and they're in Canaan, they still moved it around. It was at Bethel for a while, and then it was at Gilgal for a while, and then it was at Shiloh for a while. There were several places that the sanctuary stood. And it was actually before Solomon built this temple. That's at least a couple of hundred years, even maybe 300 years, after they came to the land. So for somewhere between 2 and 3 centuries, this structure was still the main structure that you worshipped at.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it all makes sense when you put it in that context with the instructions on how to build it, how to put it together, and all that, as well as the ark and all of the menorah and all of that. I mean,
And actually, you can actually make an argument maybe that they were better off with this temporary sanctuary than they were with the temple in Jerusalem. Because once Solomon built that temple in Jerusalem, the people in the north who really got to get there were really cut out of the religion. I mean, you'd be lucky to get down to Jerusalem once or twice a year. The rest of the time, there was no religion for you. Worship was forbidden everywhere else, anywhere else except in the temple. Whereas, with this portable tabernacle, it could be in one area of the country for a few months. It could be in another area of the country for a few months. Everybody at one time or another would get to participate. Whereas once you
Hmm.
set that temple, it
Sure.
was literally set in stone, and the north part of the country was really pretty much left out of the religion. Most historians feel that's one of the reasons it eventually broke up into two kingdoms. The North was being heavily taxed to support a temple that, they rarely saw. In fact, actually, there's some Christian historians that see a parallel, with the Christian Reformation. You know, when um, when Martin Luther finally made his trip to Rome, he was just totally appalled to see all the money that had been collected in German churches, over the years, was going to buy art. Paying, to decorate all these great buildings, that, they were turning Rome into this huge art museum. This was stuff that, people in the North, people in Germany and Holland and Scandinavia, would hardly ever get to see. And that was one of the things probably that triggered the Reformation. If you look how it fell out, the people who lived fairly close to Rome, Southern Europe, pretty much stayed Catholic. It was Northern Europe, that mainly went Protestant. And it may have been, that they put all this wealth and all this prestige into one structure, in one place.
Yeah, and they were deprived from participating in it.
Exactly. Yeah. So, as much trouble as it was to probably take this thing down and put it up again, it was probably a better way to do it, maybe.
Hmm. Yeah, because the growth cycle probably carried them over a large distance in a period of a year.
Yeah. Yeah. And essentially, you could make it really in the middle of the country if you wanted, about halfway between north and south, so that everybody had a shot of getting there at least a few
Hmm.
times a year.
Hmm.
In fact, actually, there's a reference to that in Jeremiah. When Jeremiah is preaching one of his sermons in the courtyard of the temple, and one of the things that he says is, all of you who think the temple's going to save you, forget about that. Apparently, there was a belief among the people in Jerusalem, that God would never let His holy temple be destroyed. And they had some evidence to back it up. Back in 722 BCE, the Assyrians destroyed the northern kingdom. Took them all into exile. That was the 10 lost tribes, and nobody's found since then. But then they came back in 705 and attacked the southern kingdom. And in 701, they actually surrounded Jerusalem. They were besieging Jerusalem, and it looked like Jerusalem was lost. And then they suddenly just wake up one morning. This plague has struck the Assyrian camp. They're all dead, and the city's been saved. And so, the interpretation for a lot of people in Jerusalem was, well, the temple saved us. We dodged a bullet because, God would never let His holy temple be destroyed by these heathens. And therefore, the northern kingdom deserved what they got. They were worshiping calves up there, and that they deserved, what the Assyrians did to them. But the temple's going to protect us. And Jeremiah has the sermon he gives. He says, the temple's not going to protect you. Because remember what I did, because the temple was in the north for a while. This tabernacle, it was at Shiloh, which is in the north. It was at Bethel. It was at Gilgal, which was at the north. The north had the equivalent of the temple for a while, and that didn't stop the Assyrians, from destroying their land. And the temple in Jerusalem's not going to save you either. So, and that's basically really the end of that portion. As I said, there's not a whole lot to talk about with that portion. So, it, uh, So anybody have any comments, questions, anything else you want to talk about?
I was just going to say the next paragraph or the next part about making the bronze. And again, there's reference here to women who ministered in the entrance of the tent meeting.
Yeah. In fact, there's also another little detail in here. One of the things that they also made for the burnt offering, they made mirrors, and it said the women. Well, they didn't make mirrors. It said the women gave their mirrors to be melted down, and apparently, what they were doing in those days, there was no glass for mirrors, and they were copper. The women were using highly polished copper, and actually, the archaeologists have found this in Egypt. This originated in Egypt. That's probably where they picked it up. The idea of highly polished metal being used as a mirror rather than glass. So here you have the women bringing their mirrors to be melted down for the copper to make the brass, to be used for the brass implements.
Mm.
So this really is kind of a short portion. There's not a whole lot to talk about.
Okay.
But and unfortunately, next week is pretty much the same thing. But they sort of wrap up the whole business with the with the finishing up and the final accounting of the tabernacle. Although there are some interesting parts about the dedication of the sanctuary that we can talk about next week. So,
Okay. Great.
Awesome. Sounds good.
yeah.
Yep.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Fred. I'll tell you what, this
Okay.
is so educational and it's just so great the way you
Yeah.
lead this.
Wait
Definitely.
till we get to the interesting parts of the Torah. It's much better. Okay.
All right.
Thanks, Fred.
Pretty
See you
Have a
next
good
week.
week.
Good night.
Have a good week, everyone.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Good night, everybody.